open the meeting with a call to order. And our invocation this morning will be by Nancy Meek. Nancy, are you with us this morning?
I am, President Wetmore. If you will, let us pray. Gracious eternal God, this is the season of light, light from the festive glow of the menorah, warmth from the Yule log fire, radiant beams from the tender face of the babe born in Bethlehem. In this, the darkest of months, we give thanks for the light you bring to mankind. We give thanks for the light this Rotary Club has shed throughout its long history on so many others, both here at home and throughout the world. We ask that we be nourished by food, fellowship, and reflection on our past, and energized to convey your perpetual light forward into the future. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Nancy. Appreciate that. And David, if you will, bring up the flag.
Okay.
Thank you. And if y'all will, well, it was there, but there we are. If you'll join me with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We are still, of course, trying to make as many contributions as we can to Toys for Tots. And I want to remind you that that can be done in memory of Doug Taylor if you wish, or in memory of Doug Taylor with a contribution to Polio Plus. I do want to let you know that Davidson, Holland, and Whitesville has sent a $50 to our club in memory of Doug Taylor, and we are going to send that to Polio Plus in his name, and I will advise the family that that donation was made in his honor. Also, want to let you know that as a part of our budgeting for this year, we had allocated $3,000 to give to Shelterbox. And I recently received a letter from Shelterbox thanking us for that contribution and telling us how many people they thought it would help. So I just wanted to let all of you know that that contribution was made and it has been acknowledged by Shelterbox. And I want to thank all the people who rang the bell last Saturday and the Saturday before that. Thank you for that contribution. And I want to thank David Leonetti for filling in for me last Tuesday. At this point, before we announce our main speaker, are there any other announcements that anyone needs to make before we go further?
Okay. Hey, David, hey, Lou.
Yeah.
Bill Grumman. Just a quick word. One of our scholars wrote us a thank you note. Darby Yates, she graduated from St. Stephen's in 2017, and she's graduating from Gardner Webb this spring. And she says, I want to share my graduation announcement with you and the Rotary Club of Lake Hickory. I am so appreciative of the scholarship I received from your organization. Without it, I would have been much more difficult for me to attend Gardner Webb University for the last 3.5 years. I thank you for your continued support. I will be taking an EMT class at CVC in the spring while preparing to take my MedCap for med school. Thank you. Darby Yates. Our money goes a long way to help these kids, so I just wanted to update you on that.
Well, thank you, Bill, for sharing that. That's always good to hear and good to know that we're doing some good things and that the people appreciate it and acknowledge it. That's great. Thank you. Any other announcements that anyone would like to make? Okay, well, we will move on and to the program. The program today is entitled, Can Aquaponics Cure World Hunger? And it'll be presented by my son, Eddie Wetmore. Eddie has been working with hydroponics and aquaponics for many years. And of course, as many of you know, There are some very large installations that can be made in third world countries, but of course they're quite large and have to be monitored by a professional staff. Eddie has always been interested in trying to come up with one that is more portable that individual families could use, and he has built a couple of them and shown how they work. So he's going to talk with us about that today. I have to tell you, I don't think there's any question with looking at the technological skill that he needed to put this together, that he's clearly a genius. But it's not because I'm his father that I said that. I said that because he paid me to say that. Anyway, Eddie will be presenting this to us. I'm proud of him for the work he's done, and I think you will enjoy hearing what he has to say. So, Eddie, you have the floor.
Well, let's see. Let me hit a couple of buttons here. Just occurs to me that after that fantastic introduction, none of you guys know whether I'm wearing pants now or not. So just not to do anything to embarrass you, Dad. Okay, let's see if we can get this thing started up here. I'm going to go ahead and pop this. I am fully aware, guys, that slideshow presentations, specifically PowerPoint, can be mind-numbing. And I did warn Dad, or threaten Dad, that I was just initially going to do this speech. I said, I'll just put up a slideshow on PowerPoint and just read the slides to everybody. And I thought he was going to die when I said that. So, okay, let's see if we can get this popped up here. Shift that over. And sorry about this. I'm having to fight the computer just a tad. Let's go. And then everybody tell me once we get this going whether or not you can actually see my screen or not. I want to make sure that that's coming up.
Looks like you're wearing pants.
Dadgummit. I totally missed that part. Okay, is my screen coming up, pray tell?
Yeah, we see H2 Oasis.
That's it. Okay. Well, as you guys have already started to hear the speech, I am related to Dad, so as long as you don't hold that against me, I guess we should be good to go. It's really tough to develop an interest in something few people have heard about. It's even harder to get any form of mention from people that think being aware of a problem is the same thing as dealing with it. Whenever we're chatting about aquaponics and the H2O system, the first thing we got to ask is, well, what is it? But more importantly, why in the world should we care? In general, we don't seem to have a good idea what's going on food-wise as far as the way the planet goes. We have some general ideas. You know, we've seen the horror stories of what's going on in Africa and various other places. And most of the time that you have any form of food or famine or that sort of issue, it's not so much a function of how much, but it's how much is actually getting through. And so that's part of what we're going to address today. Unfortunately, in this particular case, there's a lot of people that could not care less as far as what might be going on food-wise. They're much more concerned with far smaller items. But like we said earlier in the introduction, everybody yaps about ending world hunger, but this might be a way we can actually do it. Aquaponics in and of itself is an underutilized method of growing food and crops far faster, cleaner, and with fewer chemicals than current methods. As you guys are probably all aware, we've got some things going on now as far as our population growth. You can see a pretty heavy-duty curve there. This may or may not be accurate, but it kind of gives you an idea of where we're ultimately going worldwide. Second thing is our global freshwater use, which I'm going to take some right now, is also going through the roof. Unfortunately, our food production is not growing at the same rate. So while most of the places that are impoverished and having problems with food are having as a result of a supply chain issue, either because I've got corrupt governments getting involved or, you know, for various reasons they're having problems with storage or the heat's causing issues. It's pretty easy to see that we're about to come to a collision sometime in the foreseeable future where the production methods are simply not going to keep up with what we've got going on. And that bothers me for any one of a couple different reasons. Now, back to the aquaponics and what it is. You guys are probably familiar with aquaculture. And I know I'm going fast on this, but those overall curves can probably be seen pretty easily. Aquaculture is basically where we're growing plants, fish, sea creatures, whether it's kelp and algae for cosmetics or medical purposes, such as the blue horseshoe crabs, oysters, mussels, jewelry for a certain extent, or fish or shellfish for consumption. Most people are familiar with this, that it's at least being done on a back basis. The second thing is that most everybody is somewhat familiar with hydroponics. We've heard about it. And this is where water and nutrients are fed to plants without using any form of soil. A lot of times those particular procedures are very, very consistent, but sometimes they're not quite as good as we might like. And truth to tell, there are some crops that are being grown that still use hydroponics even to this day and insist on it. I don't know if we're necessarily going to be trying to push for those guys. Well, aquaponics is a combination of these two. This is where we grow fish or shellfish or what have you. We use that waste from that particular growing cycle. We pump it into a grow bed, and we use that to raise the plants. What happens in the grow bed is with the introduction of a lot of oxygen, you've got two different types of bacteria that will take the fish and shellfish waste and they'll break them down into fertilizer. The plants utilize the fertilizer. Then the water goes back to the initial cistern where the fish are, and they get to live in clean water. Sorry, my computer's giving me a little bit of trouble right there. So let's get this past that. Okay. The plants do filter the water and they return it back to the cistern. Now, this type of closed loop system provides fish and shrimp or mussels or whatever you might want to feed some. There's your protein source. And you also grow plants, and those can also be used to feed people. The systems can become somewhat portable. They can be very, very large at the same time. But one of the real advantages to this type of system is that it is generally 80 to 90% less water use than conventional farming. Now, that's some serious numbers. It reduces the use of the fertilizers, and soil-borne diseases are almost eliminated. The plants grow far faster and larger than conventional farming, and they have reduced pesticide use. Now, this next picture, if I can get this to come up, this is a soybean plant, which normally grows to 2 feet tall. I harvested almost an entire pound of soybeans off of just this one plant alone. So when I talk about how this can work, I'm not just regurgitating what I've read on the net. I've actually done this, and I put these all over the place. Now, in order to understand why this would be important or why we care about it, the concept that we'll be using here is called gradient. And it's going to sound like I've skipped topics. As a matter of fact, you guys are probably going to think that a couple of times during this chat. Anytime you've been in a bathtub, you guys will notice that if you move your arm, all of a sudden it feels warmer. Well, it actually does become warmer because the water closest to your skin actually cools down as your body absorbs the heat. Well, the same thing occurs in plants when they're in soil. Instead of heat, let's talk about nutrients, say calcium. The plant roots will suck the calcium out of the soil, and they'll leave a denuded zone. It's very thin, but it's around the root where there's no calcium. Now, more calcium will flow in from the outside, and then the plant sucks it back out again. I don't know if you guys can see my hands. If we are in a conveyor system like that, where the calcium and the nutrients is moving through the soil by, it's pretty obvious it's going to move very, very slowly. Sometimes we can speed up this transfer by increasing the amount of calcium or nutrients in soil by fertilizing or watering, but you also always run a great risk of overdoing it and burning the roots. The other thing is that fertilizers are expensive. They're not always consistent when they get put down. Sometimes they cause other problems to the environment. And there are a couple of other issues that can happen. I'm showing you now a picture of a couple of steaks. We're going to go back to the gradient effect and use heat as my example. The steak on the right uses very consistent heat in moving water. It's cooked in a bag. And as you can see, the steak cooks very, very evenly. There's no spots that are any different than any others. On the left-hand side, the steak, which we cook in a 400 or 500 degree oven, you can see that the outside cooks far sooner than the inside because of the difference in the temperature between the actual oven and the inside of the steak. They're not close together. They're very, very far apart. Well, the same thing happens when we're growing plants. If we don't have this smooth, constant transfer of nutrients, you can have the exact same thing that happens on the left-hand side of the steak happen to your plants. They can get burned up because they've got far more nutrients than they need. And that sort of thing can obviously cause a little bit of an issue. The other thing is that with aquaponics, you're using fish waste and shrimp waste as your fertilizer. And even in conventional farming, organic fertilizers are generally considered to be far better than the chemical fertilizers. The problem is they're more expensive, they're a lot more cumbersome, they're less consistent, and sometimes they're hard to get a hold of. So aquaponics focuses on using a liquid nutrient conveyor so the plants have full access to everything they need at all times. It's a good analogy. It's like sitting in a jacuzzi as opposed to a bathtub. The water is always moving in a jacuzzi, so you always stay warm. Well, the plants, when they don't get their roots fried, they have a tendency to grow 4 to 5 times faster on 10% of the water. They don't have to compete for nutrients, so they can be crowded together a lot closer. Now, truthfully, personal experience shows that this is not perfect because you can develop some fungal issues due to improper air circulation. Just take my word for that. Now, the actual systems themselves, they've been around for a long time. People have been using various forms of aquaponics, at least for the last 50 or 60 years that I've been able to find. And the systems range from super, super small to somewhat larger, all the way up to, gargantuan type systems. So then the question you have there is, why in the world are we not using these anywhere? Well, the problem is that economies of scale come into play. The cost of larger systems grows a lot faster than the benefit that they can give. A 600-gallon cistern, unfortunately, does not cost twice what a 300-gallon cistern costs. It's probably 4 to 5 times. And then you have the other expenses. Now you have more water to deal with. You have more fish waste to deal with. You've got more fish to keep around. And the more fish you have in a system, the greater the chance one of them is going to get sick or spread some form of disease. The pumps, or now you have 4 times the power. So I don't think you guys are going to start to see thousands and thousands of acres being devoted over to aquaponics. Because like I said, at this point of the game, it's very, very expensive and so on. Now, back to what I said. You guys are going to think I'm skipping topics here, but I'm really not. Back in the 70s, I'm guessing that some of you might have been old enough to have exposure to teletypes. And that's, I see my dad put his hand in his head, like, yeah. Basically, a teletype was a dumb terminal that could be rented, and using the phone lines, you could log into a much larger system, usually at a university. I think the first real use for this was Lexis and Nexus. I think a lot of the law libraries and law firms use them. But then this gentleman came up with a really, really neat concept. He said, instead of relying on this connection for all the information and processes, why not set up a few minor operations on a terminal that can be done without a connection to the university? Word processing, spreadsheet, file sorting. Now, it's not going to do everything that the university computer would do, but it will do most. And as you can see, what happened with personal computers went through the roof, and this is from 25 years ago, when the system became small and simple and something that the average person could be handled with. In short, by coming up with a system that would do most of what people needed, at least at that time, and make it affordable, he ended up changing the face of the planet. Well, I think we can do the same with these H2 Oasis systems. The systems may not feed a family, but it's reasonable to think that they might give enough of an edge to make the difference between starvation and survival. These are kind of tough concepts for us to understand here, because all we need to do is go to the grocery store if we run out of something. But I have been down in Latin America, I've been down in Mexico, I've been to Jamaica, and I've been in some places where they simply didn't have access to certain things. And of course, my reaction at that time was being totally offended that I couldn't go and get a pound of coffee when I needed it. But these guys have to deal with this every single day, and obviously not having coffee is just a minor inconvenience. When you start to starve as a result of not having it, well, that becomes a bit more of an issue. Unfortunately, as you can imagine, the smaller systems don't come for free. They've got a couple of problems. And the main one is they have a tendency to run out of the pH balances very, very quickly. And this can kill your fish, as they can't really stand the extremes. The pH and the ammonia balance in one of these systems could be likened to trying to balance a tennis ball on top of a tent. If it starts to roll one side or the other, it's going to start rolling really, really fast. And it's one of the reasons these things haven't become more popular than they are. The fish are the providers of the plant fertilizer, so if they start having problems with pH, that becomes an issue. The second is that unlike traditional farming, these things are active. They're not passive. They require power to function. They do have pumps that are involved, and sometimes you have to check the pHs and things like that. The third problem is one that is very, very difficult for most people to see, and I really have a hard time understanding this, but the systems are typically savagely undersized. This is one of my functioning systems now, and in a 50-gallon barrel, 55-gallon barrel, I am using roughly half of that barrel as my grow bed, which means I am running a 2-to-1 ratio to grow these plants of fish and water to the actual grow bed. Now, I don't know if you can see too well on the screen, but on the left-hand side, you'll see what are looking like little pebbles. We call these cocoa puffs or grow stones. They're basically expanded clay. They work fantastic for these systems because they're very, very light. And as I said, since they do look like cocoa pebbles, the temptation to play a horrible practical joke with these things is really, really strong. But I don't like having chip teeth, so I haven't done it. But unfortunately, these cocoa pebbles or these grow puffs are extremely hard on the environment. They're akin to lithium mining. So although we're using them a lot in aquaponics, they're really not that good. What they do is they give the plant something to hold on to, but they also give a ton of surface area for the water that has the fish waste to get exposed to oxygen. These systems don't just pump water in and out of the top grow bed. They pump it in and then drain it out totally. And we do this 3 and 4 and 5 times in the space of 5 or 10 minutes. The roots will stay wet, but this causes a huge cycling action that sucks a ton of oxygen down into the bottom to break down the waste. Like I said beforehand, you've got to have a certain amount of real estate to break down the fish waste. And most systems, including my starter system here, are savagely undersized. What that means is you start building up the fish waste, which will start causing the whole system to go out of balance and become toxic. A lot of the systems now, what they do is use a waste removal generates a swirl filter, but that doesn't make sense because the whole purpose of doing this is to capture the fish waste. The long and the short is that in order to make these systems work, and this has been in my experimentation, you have to have a 1-to-1 grow ratio, and it's better to have a 1-to-2. That means for every 55-gallon drum of fish that I'm growing, I need to have two 55-gallon drums full of grow stones that we're growing plants in. The best way to do that, you split the drums in half and fill them full of grow stones, which leads us to our fourth problem. And the fourth problem is volumetric efficiency. A lot of big words here, but the long and the short of it is that if I take a 55-gallon drum and I fill it full of grow stones, and it has a 50% volumetric efficiency, that means I can still add 25 gallons of water to it. Now, remember when I said that we were going to use two 55-gallon drums for our grow beds at a 50% volumetric efficiency? That means we still need 55 gallons to fill those two beds. And unfortunately, I've only got one 55-gallon drum over here to suck the water out of. And as you can imagine, the fish aren't going to be terribly thrilled if we're sucking all the water out of the bottom of it. I know this sounds simplistic, and it is amazing that so few people have figured out how to get around it. But if you think about the mental state of people in general, for thousands of years, we had shepherds that were walking in fields and on the sides of mountains. They were tall, they were short, they were young, they were old, men, women, all sorts of races, all sorts of intelligences, but none of them thought to look through a dewdrop and realize that it magnified their thumbprint. And if they had, we could have had binoculars and telescopes and microscopes thousands of years sooner than we did. The answer was right there. And the answer on this particular one is right there. And I'm a little embarrassed to tell you, it took me 9 years to figure this thing out. The stacked tier system that we can use, this one will take care of our issues as far as having enough grow beds. Just simply put in more beds and have them stack on top of each other. Your issue is the distance between the beds. Where do we put the plants? Well, once again, what I call the dewdrop moment is on the lower beds, we put vining plants that grow to the outside. They have the additional benefit of being able to shield the cistern and keep the temperature down. Put your tall plants in the very, very top part of it. So that handles that particular problem. However, and I fought this thing for 2 hours this morning. This was a nice little video that, oh, look at it, now it's running. This is a sequential filling mechanism. The turning wheel comes when the water's draining out of the beds, and it simply moves the nozzle to another bed. So I don't fill all 4 beds at the same time off of one cistern. I fill them one at a time, let them drain back out, and go to the second one. And when I look at this, it seems so simple, but I have looked, and I have not found anybody that's been able to come up with that. So how long it took me to come up with it, I can kind of understand that. The issue with the pH was very simple to come up with too, and a fellow out by the name of Murray Hallman down in Australia is the one that came up with this idea. He puts down a bed of oyster shells. When the pH goes down or becomes acid, the shells dissolve and they raise the pH back up. When the pH goes back up, the shells quit dissolving. It's a self-metering system. The third thing that we're dealing with now is the power issue, and I'm addressing that with a method because I'm putting a provisional patent on a method to move the water without using a water pump. It's not terribly difficult. Basically, we take a sequentially reducing tube and we pump the air into that. Well, when you've got water with a bunch of air in it, it becomes less dense, it weighs less, and the pressure outside the tube is a lot higher. And literally, it will start to force water into the tube and it'll start geysering. It's very, very simple, and it can get away with a lot of power requirements that wouldn't be sufficient to run a standard system. The last part of all of this, after the grow bed goes in and it's draining, is that these systems, there's no reason at all to think that these systems cannot be reclated with recycled materials. They're not pretty. They're the blue barrels, they're these liquid storage crates, leftover PVC pipe. It's not a pretty system, but it is a functioning system. And if we are going to try to be sending these to Kenya or Ethiopia or places like that, that would be the best thing to do in the sense of that these guys can get a hold of those very easily. We don't have to worry about them getting stopped in the border because they have some sort of high-level electronics or something that somebody could steal and sell. I don't know exactly what good they would do with a water or an air pump. Now, we're currently working with Susan Walker of the Lydia Ministries to get these systems in some of the impoverished areas. We've sent a couple down to Kenya. And between the simplicity and the low theft value, these smaller systems have turned out to have another important trait that I'm telling you, I never saw this one coming. They're portable. We had a couple of these systems down in Kenya, and a bunch of jerks showed up with machetes. And luckily, the people that had these systems were able to slap them onto a cart and haul them off. Yeah, they weigh 400 pounds, but that's movable. I can't honestly tell you that had occurred to me. However, for any system like this, you don't just have to look at charitable outlets. There's going to have to be some form of commercial aspect to this, and we've developed a couple of those that are just as fun. We've got a ton of real estate up the sides of walls, on the sides of buildings, especially on the top of manufacturing plants, all the way up to a 24th story balcony. And in order for this whole system to become self-supporting, I'm going to have a domestic market aspect of this. That means these things can't be ugly and blue or look like they came out of a trash heap, even if they do function. They've got to be a lot prettier than that. And so we've come up with a couple of systems that we think we can sell. One of the biggest system I've got right now is what I call the penthouse system. Now, what you're looking at right now is probably going to run between $15,000 and $20,000. And I can't honestly see anybody down in the South who would bother to buy that, because we can grow gardens here. But somebody up in downtown Manhattan that's paying $18 for a hamburger, I think they actually would do that, because $15,000 is not that much money. I don't know. We're going to have to see how this goes. Now, I don't know if you can't really see it on this slide here. Let me see if I can get my arrow in here. This bottom section, all of the air that goes to the fish tank is down in here, or the fish are down here. But on top of this and behind here, and I don't know why in the world I didn't put this slide in here, we're using that humid air to actually grow mushrooms as well. So we can grow all sorts of mushrooms, whether they're creminis or lion's mane or oyster mushrooms or any one of a couple of different things. You can get double duty out of the system. This is what we call our pretty system, or our Ronco system. And that's not a very flattering phrase. I honest to gosh expect people to buy these things, use them for a year or two, and then much like a treadmill, they'll start using them to hang their clothes from or something like that. I hope that's not the case, obviously, because I think this could make a heck of a difference, especially if you're in downtown New York and you can't get a hold of decent tomatoes or fresh herbs or anything like that. As a side issue, I found out that's one of the reasons why when people go to large cities like that, their food is so good, because they don't have any real storage space, which means they constantly have to have the food delivered on time, and they constantly have to make their own. They can't store it up. But like I said, we'll get back to that in just a little bit. What I want to look, aside from the commercial aspect of this, is to look at the possibility of taking these things and putting lightweight greenhouses on some of our rooftops that are not being used. We could supplement communities' foods, maybe not with a thrilling type of crop, put something like potatoes or peanuts, but daphnes and some lettuces. Again, the purpose is not to compete with existing farming, but to supplement it. Now, the weight issue on the roof would have to be taken into account, but as a general rule, the greenhouse structure could assist with shielding the building's AC and the heating cost. Perhaps we could do staffing through a local sheltered workshop, or maybe even a disabled veterans group. We could also use this in schooling. We could send smaller systems to the schools, donate them, or maybe put them into low-income areas, because the general concept does incorporate sciences, agriculture, math, environment, biology, chemistry, and so on. One of the real advantages of donating these to the lower income neighborhoods is that it's been established that if children grow their own vegetables, they have a much higher tendency to eat them, because they've kind of got an investment in it and they've grown it themselves. Now, obviously, a higher level version might garner some interest in the community and subdivision levels, as the maintenance is a lot less than traditional gardens. But again, we get into our economies of scale very, very quickly. Now, here's the last part that we're going to be pushing on this once we go past the greenhouse. This is a type that is being tested now. This is a variation of aquaponics called aeroponics. And this is where we take the nutrient solution, and rather than have the plants sit in them, it's being sprayed on. It's complex. The equipment failure is a lot more common, but need for heavy and bulky grow beds now is gone. And Disney has been experimenting with this for some time. I've actually been down there and seen this, and they're having some great success with it. So, sorry to do this to you, Dad. Of course, I had to take a system that was working and monkey with it. So, what I've been fiddling with is the possibility of doing aeroponics using an ultrasonic mist. Now, back in 1996, I discovered that most plants would glean a sufficient amount of water and nutrients from a mist delivery system. The plants are supported, but the roots simply just hang in the air. Now, if we use mist rather than sprayed water, we could literally build an aquaponics tower that is 60 stories tall. And we just have to use fans to move this nutrient mist up. There's no limit to how big these systems could be. All the equipment and hardware is in one spot to be worked on, but we could grow these things anywhere, up the sides of buildings, across things. We can put this anywhere we might want to do it. I've actually proposed this to a couple of people because we found out for some reason aeroponics does even better than the aquaponics does. Now, we're still using the fish to create our mist system, or create our nutrient system, but we're using mist as part of the nutrients conveyor, and it can go anywhere. I also found out that if you run out of nutrients or you get a thing unplugged, you've got about 45 minutes before the plants start to wilt. Guess how I know this? Well, I've taken this and I've actually proposed this to Elon Musk and SpaceX, because this mist system would allow them to provide fresh food on both the spaceships and on the final destinations. And knowing him, there's no telling what that's going to be, because they don't have to carry anywhere near the weight So far, I have not had him respond with a tear-filled missive recognizing my brilliance, but hope springs eternal. We'll have to see if it comes down. And the long and short of it is this project is actually going to make a difference as opposed to just talk about the problem. This is where we are heading now, and I'm trying to get a jump start on it. Sooner or later, we are going to see high-rise apartments, high-rise buildings, and pretty much every single vertical surface that we've got growing these plants. It's going to help with our food problem. It's going to help to a certain extent with our waste problem. It's certainly going to help with our transporting problem. And to a great extent, I think it's going to help with the global warming problem, whether that's because we caused it, because it's fake, whatever. All of this sort of thing is probably going to be having what's known as an asymptotic effect. And that's where you take individual components and you put them together and come up with a result that's far bigger, such as a director of an orchestra who takes the individual sections and comes up with a symphony. So this, ladies and gentlemen, this is where I think our future is going, and I'm trying to jump on it right now. I appreciate you guys listening to me banter, and if anybody's got any questions, please give them to me.
Pretty amazing.
One of the things, I'm sorry, Dick, go ahead.
I'm curious if your dad mentioned this in the introduction, but what was the origin of your interest in this field? Where did you get exposed to it? Where did you come across it? How did you learn?
Answer that question, but I've always been a little bit of a survivalist, and I wish to blame that on one Lou Wetmore. It is all totally his fault, because I borrowed his car one night to run a paper route. It was snowing, and I locked myself out of it. And then I realized all of a sudden, you get in a lot of trouble if things don't work exactly the way that they want to be. And I blame him for that. I mean, it's obviously his fault, not mine. So I started growing my own plants and got interested specifically in genetic selection. I can really yap about this, but in sixth grade, I started doing cross-pollination of certain types of plants. I wanted to find out what happened when I mixed a Rutgers tomato with a stone tomato. And I found how to cross-pollinate them and found out it's not the F1 generation that kicks up the genetic heels, it's the F2, and that's only if you self-pollinate or inbreed the plants back to themselves. And from there, it just kind of snowballed. I started getting more and more fascinated with how do you grow these things? What are better ways to grow them? Why in the world was my system looking great and all of a sudden it's covered in aphids? And when we got more and more into it, I've realized that not only is it the sort of thing that it's not as easy as it looks, but as we go through and our population increase, it's starting to become a lot more critical. We're not there yet. We're not at a DEFCON 5 type of emergency, but I wanted at that point of the game to do something more to protect myself. I'd had dreams of possibly living on a sailboat and wanted to know how I was going to have fresh vegetables if I'm out blue watering off the coast of Keokuk or maybe in the mountains or something like that. And that's pretty much where the whole thing started. I started realizing that this system is far larger than just these little dinky things that I'm setting up and building.
I was going to mention to you, I don't know if you know that Catawba Science Center has an aquaponics facility that 3M funded a number of years ago. I'm not sure that it's actually being used now or how it's being used, but you might want to get in touch with Cindy Seals, who's development officer, or Tracy Hall, who's the executive director over there now.
I can do that. And guys, I want to kind of keep this between ourselves. I know the fellow that set that thing up because he and I were talking about it initially. And basically when it was set up, he fell into the exact same trap that everybody else did, which was he undersized his grow beds. And so what happened is the fish started getting strangled off with their waste. So then they had to go and put a waste collector on top of that. And at that point in the game, the system just got so complex that they quit using it. If they had quadrupled the size of their grow beds on that system would still be up and running now. And I know this particular guy, and I've kind of given him a real rough way to go over it where he promptly counters with my physical appearance. But I think we're probably going to go back over there and we're going to try to redo that system and make it work a little bit better. But he fell into a very, very common trap. There are a lot of really, really smart people on this planet that have fallen into the same trap with those aquaponic systems, but you have to have enough oxygen going into the system, and there's almost no way to do it unless you have a ton of real estate. To give you an example, if I was to take a swimming pool and to pack it to its maximum density with fish, I would need to nail almost 8 acres of land to have a grow bed large enough to do it. So obviously you can't go with something small. That's really where they get caught. But I'll give Cindy a call because maybe we can go back down and fill it. And I'll call Richard again and see if he's interested in doing it. I know he's running I think he's running an organic farm where he does like his own buffalo and pork and beef, and I think he can also buy ducks from him too. So I'll give him a yell. I hadn't chatted with him in a couple of months.
Interesting is that there are a bunch of not underneath the greenhouse beds that are being used to feed some of the people through one of our local operations. Could you pipe in the waste into some of those to spread it out, fertilize those plants?
Yes, although the real trick here is you got to make sure by the time the plant gets it, it's not waste. You have two different types of bacteria that break the ammonia in the waste down to nitrites, which the plants don't particularly like, but they're not anywhere near as deadly as the ammonia is to the fish. And then from the nitrites, they break down into nitrates. So we have to have a ton of air moving in there. So by the time you're ready to pump it to the plant, it's basically not waste, although I get what you're saying. We would need to break it down before we actually put it up where the plants are. So yeah, I don't know of any reason you couldn't do that. As a matter of fact, there's a company up in Virginia called Blue Ridge Aquaculture, and they pipe out 20,000 gallons of fish poop a day. They take it to the local landfill, they bake it, and they throw it in. And it just kills me because this stuff is worth a fortune if they would just simply get some aerators on it and turn it into fertilizer. I mean, everybody knows how good earthworm castings are. This is the same sort of thing, and it's absolutely going to waste. I talked to the guy, and he wasn't even willing to let me finish the phone call. So I don't know. Maybe I'll try again.
Is it worth talking to people that have their own little fish ponds? I mean, like in my house, I've got a 1,000-gallon fish pond with koi in it, or goldfish. I'm wondering, right now I just take the waste every now and then. I take it out of the bucket and I just pour it around the plants and stuff. But I'm going like, how would that work? Could you recycle it and actually grow some vegetables?
Sure. I mean, there are a couple of ways you could do it with the fish ponds, and I've actually seen this done. The main thing is you got to introduce more oxygen to the system. So whether you put a couple of heavy-duty bubblers in your waste bucket, or whether or not you found a way to recirculate that waste through a gravel bed of some sort, yeah, you've got fantastic fertilizer. And the fish waste that you're pouring around the plants, if it's pure, it could burn the plants up. And if they're not dying, well, then it's obviously not quite. It started to break down. But you could get even more advantage if you found a way to get more water or more air into that system when you empty it out. Probably, since that's an ongoing process, I would think you'd almost want to have a second system somewhere, maybe like a bucket or a 55-gallon barrel that you dump in and aerate the heck out of it for 2 or 3 days and then use that on your plants. I think you're going to be stunned when you see what happens. It is going to make a difference. I mean, it'll really be shocking.
Thanks.
Eddie,
Eddie, Bill Lair asked this question: could you use solar tech in combination with hydroponics for areas like Haiti, where there is no electricity, and desalinate ocean water?
Yes, there's a couple of things that you can do as far as desalination. Boy, we really got into some technical stuff here. The most common method of desalination right now is called sublimation, and that's basically you evaporate the water so that the moisture and the vapor that comes off of it, depending on whatever the partial pressure of the water is, will condense on a cooler surface and drain down. That's very effective. It doesn't use much power, but it is also extremely slow. Now, a new method that they're using right now is called a pressure variable difference, and what they do is basically pressurize these tanks to put it at high pressure. That will cause a lot of your sodium ions to collect together, and then they release the pressure and then continue sucking the pressure out. When they do that, what happens is the boiling point of the water will begin dropping, and since those sodium ions have coagulated together under pressure, they have a tendency to precipitate out of the solution. Now, that does require power, but when they put it under a vacuum, the whole system begins to boil. And it's hard to believe that you can get it all the way down to the point that it'll boil in room temperature. But you have two effects from that. First of all, is as it's boiling, you're pulling heat out of the water, so the water will continue to cool to the point that it won't boil anymore. And there's only so much vacuum you can put on it. So a lot of the things that I've seen, at least down in Jamaica, was they're using this cooler water that is boiling at room temperature to cool the buildings. At the same time, since it is boiling and didn't require additional heat to be put into it, other than what the building is putting out, your water collection goes up quite a bit. The real issue now is the vacuum pumps, because there aren't really many vacuum pumps that function pumping water vapor. It's extremely harsh, especially on the oil pumps. They've experimented with something called a Tesla turbine, which uses what's called the boundary turbine effect. Basically, if you can imagine like a CD, imagine about 20 of those things stacked together, each one of them 30,000th of an inch apart, and you spin them at about 60,000 RPM. They will create a huge vacuum on one side, and that can actually pump the water vapor. Now, as far as getting back to using the solar pumps, the solar panels, I don't think the solar panels really create enough power to effectively run a water desalination thing. I mean, it's kind of amazing we got on this topic because I've played with this a little bit myself too. However, if you were to run water pumps for these smaller systems, the water pumps consume almost as much power as the solar panels take. So you're right on that break-even point. However, if instead of using a water pump, you use this geyser pump that I've developed, now that actually will be the sort of thing that a solar panel could do, although obviously that doesn't have anything to do with your salination. And you've got to be very careful, because in these systems, if the system gets hot, you have two things that happen. The first one is the effectiveness as far as deadliness of the ammonia goes up, and also the oxygen utilization by the fish goes down drastically. It's a logarithmic curve. It's like the tennis ball. If it goes off the top, it goes fast. So you have to keep these systems cool depending on the type of fish you've got in there. Goldfish and carp are pretty good for most of your upper level temperatures like you'd have in Kenya or Haiti or someplace like that. However, goldfish and carp are not exactly considered to be good eating. One of the problems we had when we went down to Kenya was we shipped a system in there and they harvested all the carp all at once, and which caused the whole system to collapse. But if you went with a cooler type fish like tilapia, well, then now you're having to worry somewhat about getting the temperatures down. And I don't know if you remember on that one piece, I don't even know if I can pull that up here. I actually have an evaporative cooler on there that uses one of those Tesla turbine pumps it pumps water up to the top of it and it sucks air down through the gravel. The air is used to aerate the whole pump, and the water also returns to the cistern. That will drop the temperature 20 degrees, but the problem is it uses evaporation. So if there are any minerals or salt in that water, it begins to build up. And that's, haven't gotten around that part yet. That's, I'm doing okay. The fish haven't died here yet, but if we put something like this into production, that's going to be the sort of thing that I'm probably going to have somebody call and want to have a word with me about.
Okay, Eddie, it's certainly been fascinating, and I appreciate you taking the time to do that with us. We're out of time now. If anyone has any questions you'd like to ask Eddie directly, send me $5 and I'll give you his phone number. How about that?
You have to appreciate the man's consistency.
Hey, Lou.
Yeah.
Lou, can you hear me?
Yes.
Before you sign off, I just want to express my appreciation to all the Rotarians who have donated their time to ring the bell for the Salvation Army, because a lot of people will benefit from the time that you spent. And I just want to express my appreciation for everyone who donated their time over the last 2 weekends.
Well, and at the same time, we want to express our appreciation to you, Lee, for putting that together and getting it done. And I'm sure there was a considerable amount of money raised during that period. At least it seemed that way for the time that I spent there anyway. Anyway, Eddie, thanks again for that. We appreciate it. And I want to tell you that the next meeting, the invocation, will be Bruce Meisner. And the program will be Rotary member stories from Jim Whitworth, Paul Caparosi, and Mandy Hildebrand. I also want to let you know that Ernie told us that so far on Polio Plus, we've had 22 people contribute, and we have a total of $1,392 in the kitty so far. So now, if each of you will join me in the four-way test, I would appreciate that. Of the things we think do,
Is it
the truth?
is it fair to all?
Will it build good
Friendship is a beneficial to all concerned.
Sorry.
All right.
Okay. Thank all of you for joining us today, and we'll look forward to seeing you next Tuesday. Have a good day.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Eddie.
Bye.
Thanks, Ed.